Strength often lies hidden in the most unassuming places, waiting for the right moment to emerge. In a bustling city repair shop, this truth would come to life on an otherwise ordinary night. What began as a brazen attempt by a gang to intimidate and rob the owner of a repair business would spiral into a confrontation that dismantled their dangerous operations. None of the gang members could have imagined that a quiet, homeless drifter was a former Special Forces operative with years of combat expertise and would come to the man's rescue. Hell-bent on revenge, their arrogance would cost them dearly. Their plans of domination would crumble, their members would be humiliated, and they would face the justice they had long evaded. This isn't just a story of a skilled veteran protecting what's right. This is about how one man's quiet courage, paired with the resilience of a determined business owner, brought down a gang that had terrorized the city and proved that determination and integrity can turn the tide against even the most ruthless oppressors. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe. Andre Phillips leaned against the wall of the alley, arms crossed, his eyes scanning the scene in front of him. The late afternoon sun cast jagged shadows across the cracked pavement, and the distant hum of traffic filled the air. From where he stood, Andre could see the street clearly, the people passing by, the shifting rhythm of life he no longer felt part of. He liked this spot because it gave him just enough cover to observe without being noticed. A man walked down the sidewalk, brisk but unhurried. White guy, mid-40s, dressed plainly in a worn jacket. He looked like the kind of man who worked hard, someone who didn't belong in a neighborhood like this. Andre frowned, watching the man head straight toward a group of young men gathered near the corner. Trey Malone stood at the center, his voice carrying easily over the low buzz of the street. He was tall, with a swagger that announced he owned the block. Behind him, Rico and Sean flanked him, their postures lazy but ready. Dante lingered a step behind, quieter than the others, but still part of the pack. "Yo, you're the guy with the repair shops, right?" Trey's voice cut through the air, loud enough for Andre to hear. The man slowed, his expression tightening. "Yeah, what's it to you?" Trey stepped forward, his grin sharp and dangerous. "We've been meaning to talk to you." "Business is good, huh?" Andre sighed and pressed back against the wall. He didn't need to hear the rest to know where this was going. He'd seen it 100 times before. Guys like Trey always started with words, building to something worse. Andre's gut twisted, but he stayed rooted. "Not my fight," he reminded himself. "It's fine," the man said, his voice firm but calm. "I don't need anything from you." Rico laughed. "See, that's the thing. You don't know what you need until someone tells you." Sean stepped closer, tilting his head. "You're doing good, man. Real good. But this is our block, and we take care of people. Call it insurance." Andre's fists tightened, his jaw clenching as he watched the man stand his ground. The guy didn't look scared, but Andre could see the tension in his stance, the way his hands stayed close to his sides. He was thinking about how to get out of this. Problem was, Trey and his crew weren't going to make it that easy. "I'm not interested," the man said, his voice sharper now. "Step aside." Trey's grin dropped, and his eyes hardened. "That's not how this works, man. You don't walk away until we're done talking." Andre exhaled slowly, his breath fogging in the cool air. He knew the next move would come any second. Trey's type always pushed until they got what they wanted, or until someone pushed back. For a moment, Andre's fingers twitched at his sides. The urge to intervene gnawed at him, but his feet stayed firmly planted. "Listen," the man said, his tone dropping into something more threatening. "I don't know who you think you are, but you're not getting a damn thing from me." The silence that followed was heavy, like the world was holding its breath. Rico leaned forward, a smirk spreading across his face. "You got a mouth on you, huh? Let's see how tough you really are." Andre shook his head, muttering to himself, "Walk away, man. Just walk away." But Daniel didn't. He stood his ground. Andre shifted against the wall, his hands shoved deep into his coat pockets. The tension in the air thickened as the men closed in around the white guy. "Daniel," he'd heard someone call him. Andre could see the man stiffen, his jaw tightening as Trey stepped into his space. "You're making this harder than it has to be," Trey said, his grin turning razor-sharp. "Let's keep it simple. Empty your pockets." Daniel crossed his arms, refusing to back down. "I told you, I'm not giving you anything. Go find someone else to bother." Rico let out a low whistle. "Ooh, tough guy. You hear that, Trey? He thinks he's got options." Andre's gut churned as Sean leaned closer, his hand reaching toward Daniel's chest. Daniel swatted it away, but Trey laughed, his amusement filling the alley like a bad smell. "Man, you've got guts. Stupid, but gutsy," Trey said, shaking his head. He gestured to Rico. "Help our friend here loosen up." Before Daniel could react, Rico shoved him hard, slamming him against the wall. The sound echoed down the alley, sharp and jarring. Daniel grunted, but he didn't go down. "Back off!" Daniel snapped, shoving Rico away. His voice was strong, but Andre could hear the strain in it. Trey sighed dramatically, spreading his arms. "See? Now you're making us look bad. We're just here to help. Why you gotta be so ungrateful?" Sean snickered and stepped forward, grabbing the front of Daniel's jacket. "Come on, let's see what you've got." Andre watched as Daniel's hands flew up, trying to push Sean off. His resistance only seemed to encourage them. Rico joined in, patting Daniel's sides mockingly before slipping a hand into his pocket. "Hey, look at this!" Rico pulled out a leather wallet, holding it up like a prize. "Man's been holding out on us." "Give that back!" Daniel lunged for the wallet, but Trey's fist shot out, catching him in the stomach. The air rushed out of Daniel's lungs, and he stumbled, his hand clutching his side. "Look at him," Sean said, laughing. "Thought he was gonna scare us off." Andre's fists tightened, his nails digging into his palms. He didn't want to get involved, but watching the man get beaten down sparked something deep in his chest. The scene played out too familiar. Helplessness, powerlessness, the same things that had haunted him for years. Daniel struggled to straighten, his voice hoarse. "You think this makes you men? Jumping someone 3-on-1? Trey's smirk widened. "Man, you're lucky we're feeling generous. Could have been worse." Andre's breath quickened, his heart pounding in his chest. He was still in the shadows, his body frozen between instinct and doubt. "Not my fight," he told himself again. "Not my problem." But Daniel didn't stop fighting. Even as they shoved him back against the wall, rifling through his pockets, he kept struggling, throwing weak punches that only made them laugh harder. Rico pulled a handful of cash from Daniel's wallet, waving it in the air. "Dinner's on him tonight, boys." The laughter grated against Andre's ears. His jaw clenched so hard it hurt. He pressed himself against the wall, forcing himself to stay rooted. It wasn't his fight. It wasn't. Then Trey raised his fist again, aiming for Daniel's face. Andre's breath hitched. He felt his body tense, the old instincts firing in his veins. The man's muffled groan echoed in the alley, breaking something inside Andre. He cursed under his breath. His feet moved before his mind could stop them, carrying him out of the shadows. Andre's shoulders pressed back against the brick wall, his eyes narrowing as the gang's mockery turned crueler. Daniel struggled to steady himself, his hands gripping the edge of the wall for support. Trey stood over him, smirking, as Rico and Sean rifled through his belongings like vultures, picking at scraps. "Check this out," Rico crowed, holding up a gleaming watch he'd pulled from Daniel's wrist. The gold band caught the fading sunlight, glinting brightly against the grime of the alley. "Man's rocking some serious bling." Daniel lurched forward, his breath ragged. "Give that back." His voice cracked, but there was desperation behind it. Trey snatched the watch from Rico's hand, examining it with mock curiosity. "Damn, this thing's got some weight to it. Bet we could get a good price for this, huh?" "No!" Daniel's shout echoed off the walls. He pushed himself upright, wobbling but determined. "That's not just a watch. It belonged to my grandfather." Sean scoffed, stepping in front of Trey protectively. "Yeah? And what's that supposed to mean to us?" Daniel's chest heaved, his voice breaking. "Please, I'm begging you. Take the money. Take whatever you want. But leave the watch." "It's all I've got left of him." The gang erupted into laughter. Rico slapped his knee. "Man's getting all sentimental on us. You hear this, Trey?" Trey's smirk widened as he dangled the watch in front of Daniel just out of reach. "Aw, come on now. Don't make it personal. It's just a watch, right?" Daniel lunged for it, but Trey shoved him back with a single hand, sending him crashing into the wall. His head hit the bricks with a sickening thud, and he slumped to the ground, groaning. Andre's fists clenched tighter, his nails digging into his palms. He'd seen enough. Every second felt like a blade carving into his chest, cutting away the excuses he'd been telling himself. The laughter, the cruelty, the way Daniel's face twisted in pain. It all ignited something inside him that he couldn't suppress any longer. Trey held the watch up again, turning it over in his hand. "Looks like we've got ourselves a little souvenir, boys. Might just keep this one for myself." "Don't," Daniel rasped, his voice barely above a whisper. "Please." Andre stepped forward, his shadow stretching out onto the pavement. His voice rang out, sharp and commanding, cutting through the gang's laughter like a blade. "That's enough." The gang froze, their heads snapping toward the sound. Andre's figure emerged from the shadows, his face hard as stone, his posture rigid with purpose. Trey's smirk faltered, but only for a moment. "And who the hell are you supposed to be?" Andre's eyes locked on Trey, cold and unwavering. "I said, that's enough. Leave him alone." Trey's smirk returned as he turned his full attention to Andre. Behind him, Daniel slumped against the wall, groaning in pain as he struggled to stay conscious. The gang barely spared him a glance, their focus now on this new interruption. "Look at this guy," Rico sneered, sizing Andre up with a dismissive glance. "What are you even doing here, huh? Shouldn't you be digging through trash or something?" Sean chuckled, stepping closer. "Man's probably mad we're messing with his favorite donation spot. Sorry, old-timer, but this ain't your business." Andre's expression didn't waver, his gaze shifting briefly to Daniel before locking back on Trey. "You've had your fun. Walk away while you still can." That brought a round of laughter from the group. Rico nudged Sean, shaking his head. "This dude serious? Thinks he's gonna scare us off looking like that?" Trey tilted his head, the grin never leaving his face. "Man, I don't know who you think you are, but this ain't your fight. So why don't you turn around and go back to your little cardboard box?" Andre's hands unclenched slowly, his shoulders rolling back as he straightened his posture. His voice was calm, almost too calm. "Last warning. Leave. Now." The gang exchanged glances, and for a moment, Trey's grin faltered. There was something in Andre's tone, something unnervingly steady, but he pushed the thought aside. He waved a hand dismissively. "Get this guy out of here," Trey said to Rico and Sean. "Show him what happens when you don't mind your business." Rico moved first, lunging at Andre with an outstretched arm. Andre shifted his weight effortlessly, sidestepping the charge and driving a hard elbow into Rico's ribs. The sound of the impact was sharp, followed by Rico's grunt of pain as he stumbled back. "What the—" Sean started, but Andre was already moving. His fist connected with Sean's jaw in a clean, powerful arc, sending him reeling. Andre's movements were fluid, precise, his years of training surfacing like muscle memory. Trey cursed under his breath. "What are you idiots doing? Get him!" Rico recovered, charging again, this time with more aggression. Andre ducked under the swing of Rico's arm, stepping into his space and delivering a sharp uppercut to his chin. Rico staggered, collapsing to his knees, clutching his face. Sean came at him next, swinging wildly. Andre blocked the first strike with his forearm, countering with a palm strike to Sean's chest that knocked the wind out of him. Sean crumpled, gasping for air as he stumbled back into the wall. "Is that all you've got?" Andre said, his voice steady, eyes flicking between the remaining men. Trey's face darkened as he stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. "You think you're hot stuff, huh? 3-on-1, and you're still standing? Let's see how long that lasts." Andre stood his ground, his stance unwavering. His sharp, calculating gaze followed Trey's every movement as the gang leader circled him, looking for an opening. Trey threw a feint, then lunged with a quick jab. Andre leaned back just enough for the punch to miss, countering with a swift kick to Trey's knee. Trey grunted in pain, stumbling back, but recovering quickly. "Come on!" Trey barked, gesturing to the others. "Get up! We're not letting this bum take us down." Rico and Sean staggered back to their feet, flanking Andre as Trey advanced again. Andre took a deep breath, his body relaxed but ready, his focus razor-sharp. Andre's breathing was steady, but his muscles burned. Trey circled him like a wolf, his lips curling into a snarl. Rico and Sean flanked him, emboldened by Trey's command. They weren't done yet, and Andre knew it. "You ain't so tough now, are you?" Trey taunted, flexing his hands as he gestured for Rico to move in. 3-on-1, old man. Let's see how long you can keep this up." Andre pivoted on his heels, tracking their movements. Rico lunged first, throwing a wide punch. Andre deflected it with his forearm, but Sean was right behind him. A fist connected with Andre's side, the sharp pain forcing him to stumble back. Trey seized the moment, stepping in with a brutal hook that clipped Andre's jaw. His vision blurred as he staggered, barely regaining his footing before Rico swung again. This time, Andre wasn't fast enough. The punch landed squarely in his ribs, the air rushing out of his lungs. "You're slowing down," Sean jeered, throwing a kick that struck the back of Andre's knee. He dropped to the ground with a grunt, one hand pressing against the pavement for support. Andre rolled to avoid a stomp from Rico, using the momentum to push himself back to his feet. But his movements were slower now, his body already aching from the barrage of hits. Trey's laughter echoed in his ears as he braced himself for the next attack. Rico came at him with a wild swing, and Andre managed to dodge, countering with a quick jab to Rico's chest. It bought him a moment of breathing room, but Sean rushed in next. His fist connected with Andre's shoulder, the impact radiating pain down his arm. Andre bit back a groan, his vision narrowing as he tried to focus. His mind raced through scenarios, calculating his next move, but his body was screaming for relief. He could feel the fight slipping away, each strike chipping away at his defenses. "Not so cocky now, huh?" Trey sneered, stepping forward. His fist slammed into Andre's stomach, doubling him over. Before Andre could recover, Sean delivered a sharp elbow to his back, sending him sprawling to the ground. Andre gritted his teeth, his hands pressing against the cold pavement as he struggled to rise. Trey loomed over him, Rico and Sean flanking his sides. "Stay down, old man," Trey spat. "You're done." But before Trey could strike again, a voice broke through the chaos. "Get away from him!" Daniel's shout echoed down the alley, raw and determined. Trey turned, his smirk fading as Daniel stumbled toward them. Blood trickled from a cut above his brow, and he clutched his side, but his eyes burned with defiance. "I said, get away from him." Andre pushed himself up on one knee, glancing at Daniel. The man was battered, barely standing, but his presence was enough to shift the gang's focus for a moment. "You gotta be kidding me," Rico muttered, shaking his head. "This guy's back?" Daniel ignored him, stepping closer. "You want to fight?" he rasped. "You're gonna have to go through both of us." Andre forced himself to his feet, the pain in his body dulled by the surge of adrenaline. He stepped up beside Daniel, their backs almost touching as they squared off against the gang. "You should have stayed down," Andre muttered, his voice low but steady. Daniel gave a weak chuckle, his lips curling into a defiant grin. "Not really my style." Andre adjusted his stance, his fists rising as the gang hesitated, their confidence wavering. "Then let's finish this." Andre stood firm, his back lightly brushing against Daniel's as they squared off against Trey and his gang. The men circled cautiously now, their earlier cockiness replaced by frustration. Rico and Sean rubbed their bruises, glaring at Andre, while Trey's sharp eyes flicked between his crew and their opponents. "Two guys," Trey muttered, his voice dripping with contempt. "Two busted-up losers, and you still can't handle them?" Andre's gaze flicked toward Daniel, who was barely holding himself upright, but still clenched his fists. "We've handled worse," Andre said coldly. "You're just a bum," Rico snapped, stepping forward. "Look at you. Frail as hell. You're lucky you're even standing right now." Andre's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Instead, he let Rico's bravado guide him into making a mistake. Rico swung wildly, and Andre ducked, stepping inside his reach and slamming a fist into his ribs. Rico let out a pained grunt, stumbling back. "Stay down," Andre warned, his voice sharp and commanding. "Get up!" Trey barked at Rico, but before he could recover, Andre shifted toward Sean, who had darted forward. Sean's punch grazed Andre's shoulder, but Andre countered with a sharp uppercut to his jaw, sending Sean sprawling onto the pavement. Trey cursed, his hands balling into fists. "You think you're tough, huh?" He lunged at Andre with surprising speed, his punch aimed squarely at Andre's face. Andre sidestepped, grabbing Trey's arm and twisting it sharply. Trey yelled, his knees buckling as Andre forced him down. Daniel managed to move forward, throwing a clumsy punch at Rico, who was trying to rise again. The hit wasn't clean, but it was enough to send Rico back down with a groan. Daniel staggered but didn't fall, his breath ragged. Andre towered over Trey, who was now on his knees, clutching his twisted arm. Sean lay groaning a few feet away, while Rico barely moved, his face twisted in pain. Andre's steady, cold gaze swept over the three men. "Not so tough now," Andre said quietly, his voice laced with controlled fury. Trey gritted his teeth, glaring up at him. "This ain't over, old man." Andre leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. "If you come back, it will be." For a moment, silence settled over the alley, broken only by Daniel's labored breathing. Then, with a sudden burst of movement, Trey grabbed a handful of dirt and gravel from the ground, throwing it into Andre's face. Andre stumbled back, his vision blurring. "Now!" Trey shouted, scrambling to his feet. Rico and Sean moved quickly, using the distraction to pull themselves up. Sean shoved Daniel hard, sending him crashing back into the wall. Andre wiped at his eyes, clearing his vision just in time to see the gang retreating down the alley, their steps uneven but fast. Trey turned back briefly, his grin twisted. "Catch us next time, old man." Andre straightened, his body taut, but he didn't give chase. His eyes stayed on the shadows where they disappeared, his breathing steadying. "They ran," Daniel muttered, his voice tinged with disbelief. I thought we had them." Andre let out a slow breath, his fists relaxing at his sides. "We did. They just got lucky." Daniel leaned heavily against the wall, wiping blood from his brow. "You were incredible back there. I mean, you wiped the floor with them. But how? Who are you? Andre hesitated, his gaze still fixed on the mouth of the alley. He didn't look at Daniel as he spoke. Just someone who's had a lot of practice. Daniel frowned, his expression searching. That's not just practice. That's training. Real training. Andre finally turned to face him, his expression unreadable. You don't need to know my story. What you do need to know is that guys like them don't quit. They'll be back. Daniel nodded slowly, his lips pressing into a thin line. Then, we make sure we're ready. Andre's eyes flicked back to the shadows, his jaw tightening. Damn right. Andre leaned against the alley wall, his chest heaving as the adrenaline began to ebb. The sharp aches of his bruises and the dull throb in his ribs were setting in now, but he barely noticed. Beside him, Daniel collapsed onto a low stack of crates, pressing a hand to his side and wincing. Hell of a night, Daniel muttered, his voice thick with exhaustion, though a faint trace of humor lingered beneath the words. Andre glanced at him, his sharp gaze assessing Daniel's injuries. You'll live, he said plainly, though his tone softened just enough to make it clear he wasn't indifferent. You've got guts. Most people would have folded. Daniel huffed out a tired laugh, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. Guts, stupidity. Sometimes hard to tell the difference. Andre allowed himself a faint smirk. Sometimes it's both. For a moment, the two sat in silence, the faint hum of the city filling the air. Andre let his gaze sweep across the alley, ensuring the gang was truly gone. His muscles remained taut, but for now, the danger seemed to have passed. You saved me, Daniel said suddenly, breaking the quiet. His tone was heavier now, the weight of the night sinking in. If you hadn't stepped in, I don't even want to think about what they would have done. Andre's eyes flicked to him briefly before returning to the alley. You held your own, he said simply, brushing off the praise. You weren't going to make it easy for them. Daniel shook his head, his voice firm. Don't downplay it. They were going to kill me, and we both know it. Andre didn't respond right away. His jaw tightened, and he looked away, his mind replaying the fight. You didn't deserve what they tried to do, he said quietly. No one does. Daniel exhaled slowly, his shoulders slumping. Still, thank you. I mean it. Andre nodded, the faintest sign of acknowledgement. You'd have done the same. Daniel chuckled weakly, rubbing the back of his neck. Not sure I'd have done it as well. The way you handled yourself back there, that wasn't just luck. You knew exactly what you were doing. Andre stiffened slightly, his face unreadable. I've had practice. Yeah, Daniel said, his brows furrowing. That much is obvious. You've been through some things, haven't you? Andre hesitated, his gaze shifting to the ground. Enough to know how to end a fight, he said finally, his voice low. Daniel studied him for a moment, then leaned back against the crates, wincing as he adjusted his posture. Look, I don't know what you've been through, and I'm not going to pry. But I know one thing. A guy like you shouldn't be out here. Andre's head tilted slightly, his eyes narrowing. What are you saying? Daniel straightened, his expression growing more resolute. I'm saying you deserve better than this. He gestured vaguely to the alley around them. Living out here, scraping by. That's not where you belong. Andre frowned, the words striking a chord he wasn't sure he wanted to acknowledge. It's not that simple. Maybe not, Daniel said, his tone softening. But I'm alive because of you. I owe you, and I don't like leaving debts unpaid. Andre folded his arms across his chest, his eyes narrowing slightly. I didn't help you for a payout. I know, Daniel said quickly, raising a hand. And that's exactly why I want to help you. Look, I own a chain of repair shops. I could use someone who knows how to handle tough situations. Someone reliable. Someone like you. Andre's brow furrowed as he studied Daniel, his face unreadable. You're offering me a job? Daniel shrugged, though the motion made him wince. Yeah. Call it gratitude, call it me wanting someone like you on my team. Either way, the offer's there. Andre didn't answer immediately, his mind racing. He hadn't expected this. Not tonight. Not ever. You don't even know me, he said finally, his voice quiet but firm. I know enough, Daniel replied. I know you didn't have to step in tonight, but you did. That tells me everything I need to know. Andre stared at him for a long moment, his expression softening just a fraction. You don't owe me anything. Maybe not, Daniel said, his tone lightening. But I want to do this. So, think about it. Andre nodded slowly, his gaze drifting back to the alley's entrance. I'll think about it. Daniel smiled faintly, leaning back with a sigh. Fair enough. Just don't take too long. Guys like Trey don't stay down for long. Andre's lips curled into a faint smirk. Neither do we. Andre glanced at the mouth of the alley, his sharp eyes scanning for any sign of the gang's return. The streets beyond were quiet now, the faint glow of streetlights casting long shadows over the pavement. Beside him, Daniel struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on the crates for support. You good to walk? Andre asked, his voice steady but laced with concern. Daniel nodded, though his wince betrayed the truth. Yeah, might take me a minute, but I'll make it. Andre stepped closer, offering an arm. Daniel hesitated for a moment before accepting the help, draping an arm over Andre's shoulder. Together, they began moving toward the main street, their steps slow and uneven. This shop of yours nearby? Andre asked, breaking the silence. Just a few blocks down, Daniel said, his voice strained but determined. I've got a first aid kit there. Should be enough to patch us up. Andre nodded, adjusting his pace to match Daniel's. The night air was cool against their skin, the quiet streets offering a strange sense of calm after the chaos of the alley. Neither of them spoke much as they walked, the unspoken weight of what had just happened settling over them. When they reached the shop, Daniel fumbled with his keys, his hands trembling slightly. Andre took the keys from him without a word, unlocking the door and pushing it open. The faint smell of oil and rubber greeted them, mingling with the metallic tang of tools and machinery. Daniel gestured toward a small office at the back of the shop. First aid kit's in there. Andre guided him to the office, helping him onto a worn leather chair before moving to the cabinet Daniel had pointed out. The kit was small but well stocked, a testament to the kind of work that went on in the shop. Let me see, Andre said, pulling out antiseptic and gauze. Daniel started to protest but stopped when Andre gave him a pointed look. Fine, he muttered, leaning back in the chair. But you're next, Andre snorted quietly. We'll see. He worked quickly, cleaning the cut on Daniel's brow and taping it up with practiced efficiency. Daniel hissed at the sting of the antiseptic, but stayed still, watching Andre with a curious expression. You've done this before, Daniel said after a moment. A lot, I'm guessing. Andre didn't look up, his hands steady as he secured the bandage. Enough times. Daniel studied him, the question hanging in the air between them. But this time, he didn't press. Instead, he offered a faint smile. Thanks, Andre nodded, stepping back. Your turn to sit still. Daniel chuckled weakly, his hand gesturing toward the chair. Fair's fair. Andre settled into the chair, and Daniel grabbed the kit, moving with deliberate care. His hands were slower, less certain, but he managed to clean the scrapes on Andre's knuckles and tape up a bruise on his shoulder. You've got a few more miles on you than I thought, Daniel said, his tone light but not mocking. Andre raised an eyebrow. That's supposed to be a compliment? Yeah, Daniel said, his grin widening. And I don't give those out often. Andre allowed a faint smirk to tug at his lips. Lucky me. They sat in silence for a while, the hum of the shop's old fluorescent lights filling the space. Daniel leaned back in his chair, letting out a slow breath. You know, he said, his tone thoughtful, You'd be good here. At the shop, I mean. I wasn't just talking earlier. Andre's brow furrowed slightly, his gaze shifting to the floor. I don't know if I'm cut out for that anymore. You're cut out for more than you think, Daniel said firmly. And we could use someone like you. These streets are rough, and having someone who knows how to handle themselves, it'd make a difference. Andre didn't respond immediately, his thoughts racing. He'd been drifting for so long, it felt strange to even consider staying in one place. But something about Daniel's words, about this shop, felt different. I'll think about it, Andre said finally, his voice quiet but sincere. Daniel smiled faintly, nodding. That's all I'm asking. Andre stood, testing his bandaged shoulder. You need rest. Both of us do. And we need to figure out what happens next. Daniel stood as well, his posture stiff but steady. Agreed. Because something tells me those guys aren't done. Andre's gaze darkened slightly, his expression hardening. They're not, but neither are we. Andre paced the shop floor, his hands resting on his hips as he surveyed the dimly lit space. The steady hum of the fluorescent lights overhead mixed with the faint metallic creak of machinery settling in the still air. Daniel leaned against the doorway to the office, watching Andre with an expression caught between gratitude and concern. You should stay here tonight, Daniel said, breaking the silence. His voice was calm, but carried a note of insistence. It's not much, but it's better than wherever else you've been sleeping. Andre stopped mid-step, turning to face him. His sharp gaze narrowed slightly, and he folded his arms across his chest. I'm fine, he said curtly. Daniel frowned, pushing off the door frame. No offense, but you don't look fine. You just took on 3 guys, got beat up in the process, and you're standing here pretending like you're bulletproof. Andre's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond immediately. His eyes flicked to the tools scattered across a nearby workbench, their orderliness betraying Daniel's meticulous nature. I've been worse off, he said finally, his tone flat. Daniel stepped closer, his voice softening. I don't doubt that. But you don't have to be tonight. The shop's safe. There's a cot in the back I used to crash on when I worked late. It's yours, if you want it. Andre hesitated, his arms tightening across his chest as if shielding himself from the offer. He wasn't used to this. Help, kindness, anything that required letting his guard down. Why do you care? Daniel's brows furrowed slightly, his tone steady. Because you saved my life, and because I've been where you are, not exactly, but close enough to know what it feels like to think no one gives a damn. Andre studied him for a long moment, the weight of the man's words pressing against the walls he'd built around himself. Finally, he let out a slow breath, his shoulders relaxing slightly. You're persistent. I'll give you that. Daniel chuckled, though the motion made him wince. That's what my wife used to say. A flicker of something passed through Andre's eyes, but it vanished as quickly as it came. Fine, he said, his voice resigned. I'll stay. Daniel smiled faintly, gesturing toward the back of the shop. Come on. It's nothing fancy, but it beats the pavement. Andre followed him through the cluttered shop, his footsteps echoing softly. The back room was small, with shelves stacked high with spare parts and tools. In one corner was an old cot, a folded blanket resting on top. Daniel motioned toward it. Make yourself at home. Bathroom's through that door if you need it. Andre nodded, stepping closer to the cot but not sitting down. He stared at it for a moment, his thoughts swirling. I haven't slept in a real bed in a while. Daniel leaned against the doorway, watching him carefully. I don't know what you've been through, he said after a moment, his tone cautious. But I can see it's been a lot. Andre's shoulders stiffened, his back still to Daniel. You don't want to know, he said quietly. Maybe not, Daniel replied. But sometimes it helps to talk. Andre finally sat on the edge of the cot, his hands resting on his knees. He stared at the floor, his voice low and even. I've done things, bad things. Some I had to, some I didn't. And I've paid for it. Every damn day. Daniel didn't press, giving Andre the space to say as much or as little as he wanted. I thought maybe out here I could disappear, Andre continued, his voice barely above a whisper. But it doesn't matter where you go. The past doesn't stay buried. Daniel nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. The past doesn't have to define you. Andre looked up at him, his eyes dark and guarded. It does, when it's all you've got. Daniel straightened, his tone firm but not unkind. Maybe it's time you had something else. Andre didn't respond, his gaze drifting back to the floor. The silence stretched, heavy, but not uncomfortable. I'll let you get some rest, Daniel said finally, turning toward the door. Lock up if you need to. We'll figure out the next steps in the morning. Andre nodded, pulling the blanket over his lap as Daniel left the room. The soft click of the door closing was followed by silence, save for the faint hum of the shop's lights. For the first time in what felt like years, Andre allowed himself to relax, his body sinking into the cot. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, it was deep and dreamless. Andre stirred awake to the faint creak of the shop door. His instincts sharpened instantly, his muscles tensing as his eyes adjusted to the pale morning light filtering through the small window. Sitting up quickly, he scanned the room, his body still coiled for action. Easy, came Daniel's familiar voice. He stepped into the room, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. It's just me. Andre relaxed slightly, though his shoulders remained stiff. He rubbed the sleep from his eyes, still half-dazed from the first decent rest he'd had in months. What time is it? Early, Daniel replied, setting one of the cups on the small table by the cot. Thought you could use this. Andre nodded his thanks, wrapping his hands around the cup and letting the warmth sink into his skin. The bitterness of the coffee woke him further, grounding him in the moment. He glanced at Daniel, who looked tense despite his casual demeanor. You look like you've seen a ghost, Andre said, his sharp gaze narrowing slightly. Daniel hesitated, leaning against the doorframe. It's probably nothing, he said, though his tone betrayed the uncertainty in his words. Andre raised an eyebrow. What happened? Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. On my way here this morning, I got this feeling. Like someone was following me. Andre straightened, setting his cup down on the table. You're sure? Daniel shrugged, his hands gesturing vaguely. Not entirely. It was just, you know that sense you get when someone's watching you? I looked back a couple of times, but I didn't see anyone. Still, it didn't feel right. Andre's expression darkened, his jaw tightening as he processed the information. Could have been one of them. Trey and his guys like to size up their targets before they make a move. Daniel frowned, his arms crossing over his chest. You really think they'd try something again? After last night? Absolutely, Andre said firmly. They're pissed, and they've got something to prove. You humiliated them, and I made them look weak. They won't let that slide. Daniel let out a slow breath, his shoulders slumping slightly. Great. So now what? I can't keep looking over my shoulder every time I leave the house. You don't have a choice, Andre said, his tone calm but direct. Until this is over, you stay alert. If you think someone's following you again, don't lead them here or anywhere important. Stick to crowded places, take detours, and keep your phone on you at all times. Daniel nodded slowly, processing Andre's advice. All right, what about the shop? They know where it is. If they want to hit me where it hurts, this is the place they'll go. Andre leaned back, his fingers drumming lightly on the arm of the chair. That's why I'll stick around for now. Watch the area. Keep an eye out for anything suspicious. If they're planning something, they'll slip up. Daniel tilted his head, studying Andre. You're really willing to go this far. You've already done so much. Andre's lips pressed into a thin line. I don't like unfinished business. Trey's the type who thinks he owns these streets. If we don't stop him, he'll keep coming. Daniel nodded, his jaw tightening. Then we do this smart. I've got cameras around the shop. They're basic, but they work. Maybe we can catch something useful. Andre smirked faintly. Not bad. Daniel gave a small shrug, his expression grim. Learned the hard way. You don't